Look at him. A black garbage man charged with robbing a sick old woman. Pathetic!
That was Prosecutor Gregory Sullivan, pointing at the man in the orange jumpsuit. Theodore Coleman, 58, sanitation worker. Hands cuffed on the defense table. Sullivan walked up close, wrinkled his nose, then flicked Theodore's collar like flicking off trash.
You still smell like the truck.
The gallery laughed. Theodore didn't move.
Your Honor, this man an elderly heiress. This man stalked and robbed her. He's a parasite in a uniform.
Theodore swallowed, then quietly answered.
Sir, I'm sorry. I just brought her home through the snow.
Sullivan smirked and turned to the bench. The courtroom doors swung open behind him. 3 women walked in. 3 white women. A defense attorney, an FBI director, a federal magistrate in a black robe. The gallery went silent. All 3 looked at the black garbage man in handcuffs, and at the same moment said one word.
Daddy.
To understand how Theodore Coleman ended up in that courtroom, you have to go back 3 months. Before the handcuffs, before the lawyers. Back to a small clapboard house on Linden Street in Cincinnati, where the alarm clock went off at 4:42 in the morning, the way it had for 31 years. Theo sat up slowly. His back hurt. It always hurt. He kissed 2 fingers and pressed them to the photo on the nightstand. A woman with kind eyes and a wide smile. Morning, baby. His wife, Loretta, had been gone 12 years. He still talked to her every morning. In the kitchen, he poured black coffee and ate 2 pieces of dry toast. He counted his blood pressure pills into a small plastic organizer. On the fridge, 3 faded ribbons hung from a single magnet. 3 different graduation years, 3 different colleges. If you looked close, you'd see his hands shake when he passed them. He limped down the hallway past 3 framed plaques on the wall. He didn't look at them long. He never did. He just whispered the same thing under his breath as he walked past. Make me proud, Theodore. He pulled on his reflective sanitation jacket, slipped a small laminated card over the visor of his keys. Same handwriting as the woman in the photo. Same words. Make me proud, Theodore. Outside, snow was starting to fall. He walked to the depot the way he always did. Slowly, the limp got worse in the cold. On the corner of Linden and Gilbert, an older man in a torn coat sat against a brick wall. His name was Cyrus. He'd been there for years. Theo pulled the second piece of toast out of his pocket, wrapped in a napkin. You eat that, Cyrus, you hear me? Cyrus took it with both hands. Bless you, Theo. Bless yourself. I just brought breakfast. At the depot, his foreman, Earl Ramsey, was already in a bad mood. Earl had a clipboard and the kind of frown that meant bad news. He pulled Theo aside near the back of truck 22. Coleman, word from upstairs. The cutting routes again. Seniority might not save you this time. Theo nodded, said nothing. Inside, his stomach dropped. He was 2 months behind on the mortgage. The doctor had told him he needed back surgery. The insurance wouldn't cover it. He hadn't told the girls. He never told the girls. His partner, Benny Walters, climbed into the cab with 2 coffees and a grin that didn't fit the morning. Sleep, old man? Sleep is for retired folks. You'll be retired by Friday at this rate. Theo half laughed, started the engine. Truck 22 grumbled to life. The heater coughed out lukewarm air. They pulled out at 6:15. The route was the wealthy district, Hyde Park and Indian Hill. Big houses, long driveways. The kind of route nobody asked for. Theo waited at a red light. The wipers struggled against the snow. The card on his visor swayed gently. He closed his eyes. Rain like this always made him remember that night. It was 1998. He was 30 years old. Loretta was 28. They had just left the hospital for the 3rd time. The 3rd time, a doctor had sat them down with that careful voice and told them what they already knew. They were never going to have a child of their own. They drove home on Highway 50 in silence, rain hammering the windshield. Then Theo's headlights caught something in the ditch. A minivan, flipped on its roof, the wheels still spinning, smoke rising from the engine. He slammed the brakes. Loretta screamed, "There are people in there!" Theo jumped out into the rain without his coat. The father was dead, head against the glass. The mother was still breathing, barely. She looked at Theo. She tried to point to the back of the van. Her lips moved. "My children. 3 of them. Please." Then she was gone. Theo crawled into the back. 3 little girls. The oldest, maybe 4 years old, sitting perfectly still, eyes wide. The middle one, maybe 2, screaming. The smallest, an infant, 8 months old in a car seat, silent in a way that scared him more than the scream. He checked her pulse. She was alive. Loretta climbed in beside him, soaked to the skin. She lifted the baby out of the car seat, sat down right there in the mud, pulled the baby against her chest, against her skin to keep her warm. The ambulance came. The police came. A social worker came at 4 in the morning. She told them the truth. The girls had no living relatives, both grandparents gone, no aunts, no uncles. The system was going to split them up. 3 foster homes, 3 different cities. They'd never know each other. Loretta was still holding the baby when she dropped to her knees in front of the social worker. "Please, don't separate them. Their mother asked us." "Ma'am, you don't have any guardianship paperwork." "Then we'll make some. Tonight." In the parking lot, an hour before sunrise, Theo found his voice. "We don't have the money, Loretta." Loretta looked down at the sleeping baby, then up at him. "We'll find a way." Theo nodded slowly. "We'll find a way." The light turned green. Theo opened his eyes. He drove on. The card swayed on the visor. He didn't know it yet, but that morning, another woman would need him to stop. And this time, stopping would cost him everything. He didn't see her at first. He was pulling a bin from a curb on Madison Road when he caught a flash of blue between 2 hedges. Light blue. The wrong kind of blue for that morning. The kind of blue that meant a thin sweater, not a coat. Not in this snow. He stopped walking. Through the gap in the hedges, he could see her now. A woman, maybe 65 years old, gray hair loose around her shoulders, light blue cardigan, no shoes, standing barefoot on a frozen lawn, talking softly to a mailbox. Theo signaled to Benny in the cab. Benny nodded and stayed put. Theo walked over slowly, hands open at his sides, his voice low and calm. "Ma'am, my name is Theo. Are you all right out here?" She turned her head and looked at him, not afraid, not confused exactly, more like she was looking for someone she half remembered. "Have you seen Charles?" she asked. "Charles is supposed to pick me up at 4. Theo took another careful step forward. "It's not 4 yet, ma'am. It's about 6:15 in the morning." She blinked, then looked down at her own bare feet on the snow, as if she were noticing them for the first time. "Oh," she said, "I don't have shoes." His chest tightened. She didn't have a coat. She didn't have a phone. There was no medical bracelet on her wrist. Her cardigan had no name tag, and her feet were turning blue. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she lived, and the snow was getting heavier. A curtain twitched in the window of the closest house. A man's face appeared for half a second, watched, then disappeared. The curtain fell back into place. Theo waited a beat, hoping. Nobody came out. He pulled his radio from his belt. "Benny, I need you to wait. I got something here." Benny's voice crackled back. "What do you mean, something?" "A lady, confused, cold. Stay in the truck." Theo did the math in his head, fast. If he left her to look for help, she might wander into traffic. If he called 911 and waited, she could be hypothermic by the time anyone arrived. If he took her into his truck, A black sanitation worker carrying a confused white woman through a wealthy white neighborhood. He knew exactly how that looked. He could already hear the sentences, the ones people would say, the ones people would whisper. He thought of Loretta. "Don't you dare let anybody fall on your watch, Theodore." He took off his reflective sanitation jacket, the thick one, the one that kept him alive in winters like this. He stepped forward and laid it gently around her shoulders. "Ma'am, my name is Theodore Coleman. I'm going to get you somewhere warm. You walk with me, okay?" She looked down at the name patch on his shirt, read it slowly the way you read something in a dream. "Theo," she said. "Like Theodore Roosevelt." A small flicker behind her eyes, then a smile.
"You have kind eyes, Theodore."
He guided her toward the truck, slowly, one step at a time. She held his arm tight as if she was afraid she might float away. The radio crackled again. "Theo, supervisor's pulling onto the route. Where are you?" He spoke quietly. "Tell him I had a medical." A long pause on the other end, then Benny answered. "Copy that." They walked together to the nearest house. He rang the bell. Nothing. He rang it again. He could see lights on inside, movement behind a curtain. Nothing. The next house, same thing. The third house. A woman opened the door, looked at Theo with the woman in his coat, and said only one word. "No." Then she shut the door. The fourth house. A teenage girl. She opened the door, saw Theo's face, saw the bare feet of the woman beside him, and called over her shoulder. "Mom, there's a—" She slammed the door before she could finish the sentence. The woman beside Theo was shivering hard now. Her teeth were starting to chatter. Her lips were going pale. He looked down at her. "Ma'am, I'm going to put you in my truck. We're going to drive to the police station. Is that all right with you?" She looked up at him, trusted him completely. "Yes, Theodore." He helped her up into the cab of truck 22, wrapped her in an old shop blanket from behind the seat, cranked the broken heater all the way up. The cab was small, the smell of grease and coffee. She didn't complain. She just kept holding his hand. Benny looked at Theo across the cab, voice low. "Brother, you sure about this?" Theo looked at the woman shivering between them, at her bare feet on the rubber mat, at the small smile she gave him when he tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "No," he said, "I'm not sure about anything." He paused. "But I'm not leaving her in the snow." Benny put the truck in gear. And the decision Theodore Coleman just made, to put a confused white woman with no ID into the cab of his sanitation truck, was the exact decision that, 3 months later, would put him in chains. The cab of truck 22 was warm now. The heater was busted, but it was working hard enough to feel like something. Theo sat in the passenger seat. The woman sat in the middle, wrapped in his coat and the shop blanket, holding his hand like a child holds a parent's hand on the first day of school. He pulled out his phone. 911. The line picked up on the third ring. "All operators are currently assisting other callers. Please hold." He held. 40 seconds passed. A minute. 2 minutes. Snow piled on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. He hung up. Tried the non-emergency line. "Yes, hello, my name is Theo Coleman. I work for Cincinnati Sanitation. I have a woman here with me. Possible dementia. She's lost. No ID." The line crackled. Static. A long beep. Then nothing. He looked over at the woman. Her shivering had slowed. That wasn't necessarily good. "Ma'am, I need your help. Can you tell me where you live?" She opened her eyes, closed them, opened them again, her brow furrowed. Then something cleared behind her eyes, just for a second. "Grandin," she said. "Grandin Road. The white house with the green shutters. Bradford lives with me. Bradford takes care of things." Theo grabbed the stub of a pencil from the dashboard and scribbled it on the back of a route sheet. Bradford? My nephew. He's a good boy. Something in the way she said good boy didn't sound right, but her eyes were already drifting closed again. Benny pulled out onto the main road and headed up the hill. The Grandin house wasn't hard to find. White colonial, green shutters, iron gate, camera on a post. Theo got out and pressed the call box. Nothing. He pressed it again, held it down. A man's voice, annoyed, half asleep. Who is this? Sir, my name is Theodore Coleman. I work for Cincinnati Sanitation. I have a woman here. She says she lives at this address. Her name is Margaret Hollister? A long pause on the other end. The kind of pause where you can hear a man's whole brain rearranging. Drive around to the side gate. Now. The side gate buzzed open. A man came out of the house in an expensive cashmere sweater and pajama pants. Bradford Hollister, late 30s, jaw clenched. He didn't run. He didn't smile. He didn't even look relieved. Behind him, through the open front door, Theo caught a glimpse of the foyer. A wall safe, open, papers spread across a hallway table. Theo didn't think much of it in the moment. He was too focused on the woman in the cab. But you should remember that detail. Theo will remember it later. Bradford walked up to the truck, yanked the passenger door open, reached for the woman's elbow, hard. She flinched, just a little, but Theo saw it. Margaret Hollister, 64 years old, mother to none, pulled her own arm back from her own nephew, like he was a stranger, like he was something worse than a stranger. Bradford turned on Theo. Where the hell did you find her? Madison Road, sir. About 6 blocks from here. She didn't have a coat. She didn't... How do I know you didn't take her out of the house yourself? Theo stayed calm. He had been calm his whole life. He didn't know how to be anything else. Sir, I just brought her home. Stay right there. I'm calling the police. Yes, sir. I'd like that. Bradford did a double take. He hadn't expected that answer. Officer Hannah Whitaker arrived 12 minutes later. Young, maybe 30. She carried herself like she was good at her job and tired of men who weren't. She listened to Bradford first. He spoke fast. He said Theo had probably broken in earlier, said Margaret had dementia, said she couldn't be trusted to identify anyone. Then Officer Whitaker asked Margaret a question. Ma'am, do you know this man? Margaret looked at Theo, smiled weakly. Theodore is my friend. He gave me his coat. Officer Whitaker took both statements separately. She looked at Theo's sanitation ID, his driver's license, the route sheet from truck 22 with Margaret's handwriting in pencil saying Grandin Road. She turned to Bradford. Sir, there's no probable cause here. Bradford's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He just looked at Theo with something cold in his eyes, something patient, something that didn't go away. He took Margaret inside without saying thank you. On the porch, out of earshot, Officer Whitaker turned to Theo. Mr. Coleman, you did the right thing today. Some people wouldn't have. She handed him her card, her direct line written on the back in pen. If anything ever comes back at you about this, you call me. I mean it. He tucked the card into his wallet, behind a small folded photo of Loretta. He had no idea how soon he was going to need it. The drive back to the depot was quiet. Benny gripped the wheel hard. Theo, that man is going to come for you. You know that, right? Theo looked at his hands. They were still cold. I know, Benny. I know. At the depot, Earl was waiting in the yard. He'd been there an hour. Theo was 2.5 hours behind on the route. Earl chewed him out in front of the whole crew. He used words Theo wouldn't repeat at home. Theo only said one thing. There was a lady in the snow. Earl stared at him. For a long second, something in his foreman's eyes softened. Then it shut down again. He had a job to do. Ride up. Final warning, Coleman. One more, and you're out. That night, Theo walked home in the dark. The snow had stopped. The sky was clear. He sat on his porch in the cold, looked at the 3 diploma plaques visible through the front window, whispered into the empty dark. "Loretta, I think I just messed up." He paused. "But I think I did right." He sat there a long time, the card in his wallet pressed against Loretta's photo. He didn't know it yet, but 3 months from now, when the world came for him, that card would be the first thing he reached for. And the woman in the blue cardigan he just drove home, Margaret Hollister, was about to become the most important name in his life. For all the wrong reasons first, and then for all the right ones. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at Theo's house. Not in the mail, hand-delivered. Cream-colored paper, heavy. The kind of envelope that doesn't come from anybody he knew. He took it inside, set it on the kitchen table, made a fresh pot of coffee before he opened it. Then he sat down, slid a butter knife under the seal, pulled out a folded letter. The handwriting was shaky, old, but careful. "Mr. Coleman, you gave me your coat. I would like to give you something back. Please call this number. Margaret." Inside the letter was a check, $25,000. Theo stared at it for a long time. His coffee went cold. He didn't move for almost an hour. Finally, he picked up the phone and called the only number he ever called when his head was loud. Pastor Reginald Holloway picked up on the second ring. "Reverend, I need to think about something." "Speak, brother." Theo laid it out. The woman in the snow, the check, the amount. He laid it out slow. He laid it out flat. He didn't editorialize. Then he started thinking out loud. "I'm 2 months behind on the mortgage, Reverend. This catches me up. With money to spare for the back surgery." But I didn't help her for this." And if I take it, every neighbor of hers is going to say I took advantage of a lady with dementia." "Maybe." "And my girls would tell me to look in the mirror." Pastor Holloway was quiet for a long beat. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "Theo, what does Loretta say?" Theo closed his eyes. He could see her face right then, clearer than he had seen it in weeks. She'd say give it back. The Reverend waited. Theo opened his eyes again. 28 years ago, Reverend, when those 3 girls came to us, there was insurance money from their parents' policies. I never touched a dollar of it. I put it in trust. They got every cent of it for college. Loretta and I, we worked. We never touched it." His voice cracked just a little. "I'm not starting now." "Then you have your answer, brother." He hung up, sat at the kitchen table, picked up a pencil, wrote on a piece of plain notebook paper. "Mrs. Hollister, I cannot accept this. I gave you my coat because that is what a person does. If you want to thank me, please get well. Theodore Coleman." He folded the check inside the letter, sealed the envelope, walked it to the mailbox before he could change his mind. He didn't take a picture of the check. He didn't even tell Benny about it. He didn't tell anyone. That same week, the mortgage company called. He asked for a hardship deferment. They denied him. He didn't argue. He just said thank you and hung up. That same evening, his middle daughter called. "Daddy?" "Hey, baby. You sound tired." "Just a long week. How's that big case of yours?" "Big? I'll tell you about it when it's done." "You take care of yourself, Naomi, you hear me?" "You first, Daddy." He smiled into the phone. Didn't tell her about the check. Didn't tell her about Officer Whitaker. Didn't tell her about Earl's final warning. Didn't tell her about the mortgage. He never did. That was the rule in the Coleman house. The girls did their work. He did his. After the call, he walked into the kitchen, took Officer Whitaker's card out of his wallet, looked at it for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he taped it to the inside of his wallet. right behind the small folded photo of Loretta, just in case. He didn't know it yet, but Bradford Hollister had already started making phone calls. The kind of phone calls that destroy a man before he ever sees the storm coming. Bradford Hollister had a problem. The problem had a name. The name was Theodore Coleman. Bradford sat in his glass-walled office on the 20th floor of a downtown high-rise. He stared out at the river. He was on speakerphone with someone whose face the camera never showed. "She wandered out again," he said. "Some sanitation guy brought her back. He saw the safe. He saw the papers." The voice on the other end said something low and tight. "Yes, I know what it looks like." Bradford turned to the desk behind him. Spread across the glass were three things Margaret Hollister had never been shown. A draft conservatorship petition, the kind of document that takes a competent woman's life away from her. A power of attorney transfer, the kind of document that hands her bank accounts to someone else. A wire transfer record, the kind that ends in an offshore account in a country with no extradition. Bradford had been moving money for 14 months, quietly, carefully, building a paper trail that would prove Margaret was incompetent, building a case to take everything away from her. And it had all been working. Until a black man in a sanitation jacket walked his aunt through the front door, and his aunt looked clear-eyed at a police officer and said, "This is my friend Theodore." If Theodore Coleman ever stood in a courtroom and said Margaret Hollister recognized her own street, recognized her own house, recognized her own life, Bradford's entire conservatorship case fell apart. He couldn't let that happen. He picked up the phone, made a different call, to an old college friend at the district attorney's office. "Greg, got a favor to ask you." 3 days later, a missing property report was filed retroactively. The list was specific: a Cartier watch, a pearl necklace, $8,000 in cash from Margaret's bedroom. None of it had ever existed. None of it was on her insurance riders. The housekeeper, an older woman who had worked for the family 11 years, signed a statement she had clearly been told to sign. Her hands shook when she signed it. In the corner of Bradford's office, a muted television was playing local news. A red banner crawled along the bottom. "FBI investigating Cincinnati wealth management fraud. Director declines comment." A young woman walked past the camera in the background of the news clip. Blonde, sharp suit, federal credentials clipped to her belt. The camera didn't catch her face, just the top of her head and the shape of her badge. Bradford never noticed. He was too busy congratulating himself. He thought he was attacking a sanitation worker, a man with no money, no lawyer, no way to fight back. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that he had just kicked a hornet's nest, and the three women inside that nest were already moving. He just didn't know it yet. 6 weeks later, 2 detectives knocked on Theo's door at 6:14 in the morning. They were polite. They said the words, "just a few questions." They asked him to step outside. He was still in his work uniform, lunch pail in his hand, ready to walk to the depot. Then they read him his rights. The charges were serious: burglary, larceny from a vulnerable adult, criminal trespass. The bail was set high, higher than a sanitation worker without a savings account could possibly post. Theo sat in the county lockup for 3 full days. He used his one phone call. He did not call his daughters. He called Pastor Holloway. When Pastor Holloway showed up at the jail, Theo was sitting on the metal bench in his orange jumpsuit, hands folded in his lap. The Reverend pulled up a stool on the other side of the glass. "Theo, why didn't you call your girls? They're working, Reverend." "Theo, they got their own cases, important cases. I'm not pulling them off important work for an old man's mess. I'll figure it out. I always have." The Reverend looked at him for a long time. "Theo, I love you, but you are about to find out You are not the only person who decides what your daughters do." He stood up, walked out of the jail. He did not go home. He drove to a rest area on Reading Road, parked under a streetlight, and made 3 phone calls. In her chambers at the federal courthouse, senior U.S. Magistrate Judge Adrienne Coleman was on the bench in another matter when her clerk slipped her a folded note. She read it once. Her face went perfectly still. She raised one finger to the courtroom and stepped down off the bench. Then she picked up her phone. Across town, in a glass-walled deposition room, Naomi Coleman was mid-question when her assistant interrupted. "It's your sister." Naomi excused herself, took the call in the hall. She listened for 30 seconds. She said only one word. "When?" In a corner office on the 8th floor of the FBI Cincinnati field office, Special Agent in Charge Vanessa Coleman was reviewing the Hollister Logistics financial fraud file. She had been quietly building it for 9 months. She took the call. She closed the file. She set it on her desk. She said 3 words. It just got bigger. The arraignment was set for 9 in the morning, 3 days later. Theo was brought into the federal courtroom in his jumpsuit. He was told he would be assigned a public defender. He sat down at the defense table. He folded his hands. He looked down at the small Polaroid he had been allowed to keep. 4 people on a porch. A tired man, a smiling woman, 3 little blonde girls. Behind the small photo, tucked behind it, was a small laminated card. "Make me proud, Theodore." L. He read it under the table, just for himself. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Naomi Coleman walked in. She set her briefcase on the defense table next to her father. She did not look at him. She did not so much as breathe in his direction. Professional discipline. She turned to the bench instead. "Counsel for the defendant, Your Honor. Naomi Coleman of Coleman, Briggs & Hartley." Theo's eyes filled. He didn't say a word. Across the courtroom, Gregory Sullivan, the assistant district attorney, stood up. He did not yet know what room he was standing in. He launched into his prepared remarks. Confident. The black sanitation worker. The confused heiress. The missing items. The clear-cut case. He was about 3 sentences in when the doors opened again. A second woman walked in, federal credentials at her hip. The gallery murmured. The bailiff approached the bench, whispered something. The presiding judge called counsel forward. Sidebar. The woman was Special Agent in Charge Vanessa Coleman, FBI. She was there to inform the court that the entire Hollister estate was under active federal investigation for wire fraud, embezzlement, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. An investigation that had been running for 9 months. An investigation that predated Theo's arrest. Sullivan's case was now built on what federal prosecutors politely call compromised material. The presiding judge looked at the docket, looked at the names walking into her courtroom, and quietly recused herself. The case was reassigned, within minutes, to the next available federal magistrate. The bench card flipped on the digital display. Honorable Adrienne Coleman. She walked in through the side door in her black robe. She saw her father at the defense table. The whole room expected fireworks. The whole room expected drama. What she did was the opposite. She sat. She tapped her microphone once. She spoke very calmly, very clearly, and entirely on the record. For the record, the defendant in this matter is my father. I am recusing. Bailiff, please escort the defendant to a private holding while a new judge is assigned. Then, off the record, just above a whisper, only loud enough for one man to hear, she said one more thing. Daddy, we're handling it. On the courthouse steps an hour later, a local news reporter who had been tipped off by a courtroom clerk caught all 3 women walking out together. He held up his microphone. Excuse me, are the 3 of you related? Naomi answered. We're sisters. And the gentleman in the courtroom is your father? Naomi looked into the camera. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steel. "Our father is the gentleman being framed. He pulled us out of a flipped car in the rain when we had nobody. He raised us by himself after our mother passed. Now it's our turn to make sure he isn't standing in there alone. And we'd like to introduce ourselves to the city of Cincinnati. Properly." That night, every local station led with the story. In a holding cell down the hall, a guard slipped a folded piece of paper through the slot. "From your daughters, sir." Theo unfolded it. 3 lines of handwriting, 3 different signatures. "You raised 3 daughters by yourself for the right reasons. Now we get to be the right reasons. A.N.V." He sat down on the cold metal bench. He cried into his hands. For the first time since Loretta died, he was not alone. The new judge took the bench 3 days later. No conflict, no Coleman name in the family tree, just a clear-eyed federal jurist who had read the file overnight. The case against Theodore Coleman fell apart in less than an hour. Special Agent Vanessa Coleman's evidence was airtight. The missing Cartier watch had never existed. There were no riders for it on the Hollister insurance policies, no purchase records, no appraisal. The pearl necklace was the same. The $8,000 in cash was a number Bradford Hollister had pulled out of the air. Officer Hannah Whitaker's body camera footage from the morning of the rescue was entered into evidence. Margaret Hollister, soft-spoken but clear, looked into that camera and said the same thing she had said at her own front door. "Theodore's my friend. He gave me his coat." Margaret's treating physician took the stand. He testified that on the morning in question, his patient was experiencing a clearer cognitive window than she had in months. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice. That same afternoon, federal indictments came down on Bradford Hollister. Wire fraud, embezzlement, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, filing a false police report. The 9-month investigation Vanessa Coleman had been building landed all at once. Bradford was led out of his glass-walled office in handcuffs. The local news cameras were already waiting on the sidewalk. Somebody had tipped them off. Theodore Coleman walked out of the courthouse in his own clothes for the first time in 3 weeks. Pastor Holloway was waiting on the steps. So was Benny. So was Earl Ramsey, the foreman, who had driven himself down on his lunch break in a clean shirt and an old leather jacket. Earl pulled Theo into a hug. The kind of hug men of a certain age don't usually give each other. "Coleman, your job is waiting. Whenever you're ready." Theo squeezed his shoulder. "Earl, I appreciate that, I do. But I think I need a minute." His 3 daughters waited at the bottom of the steps. They had let him have his co-workers first. They knew exactly who he needed to see in what order. That night at the small house on Linden Street, an attorney from Margaret Hollister's personal trust came by with a folder. He laid out an offer. The trust had been restored under proper court-appointed conservatorship. Bradford was no longer involved. Margaret had directed her attorneys to use a portion of her personal estate to start a foundation. $5 million in initial funding. The Margaret Hollister Dignity Fund. The fund would do 3 things. It would provide wage support and disability insurance for sanitation, custodial, and caregiver workers in Hamilton County. It would create a scholarship program for the children of essential workers. And it would launch a wandering prevention partnership between local police, sanitation departments, and families with members suffering from dementia. Margaret wanted Theo as the founding chair of the board. Salary, $125,000 a year. Lifetime appointment. Theo did not say yes that night. He thanked the attorney, walked him to the door, then sat down at his kitchen table for 3 hours and didn't say a word. The next morning, he called Pastor Holloway. Then he called all 3 of his daughters on a 4-way call. He told them the offer. Naomi laughed. Adrian cried. Vanessa just said, "Yes, Daddy. Yes." He accepted, with 2 conditions. The first condition: Cyrus, the unhoused man on Linden Street, would be the first participant in a Housing First pilot, tied to part-time work at a local shelter so that Cyrus could keep his pride. The second condition. The first scholarship cohort would include Benny Walters' grandson. Margaret's attorneys agreed to both within a single phone call. Then there was one more thing. Hollister Logistics, now under interim leadership without Bradford, announced a sanitation route safety initiative with a quiet press release. Theo was named as a paid consultant, and the Cincinnati Sanitation Department, under pressure from a city council that had watched the Coleman story for 2 weeks straight, announced a brand new policy. It had a name. The Coleman Protocol. A formal procedure for sanitation workers who encountered a vulnerable person on their route. Training, funding, and the most important part, full pay protection. No worker in Cincinnati would ever again be written up for stopping a truck to help somebody in the snow. That weekend, Theo finally walked Margaret Hollister through his small house on Linden Street. He stopped in the hallway, where she had never been before. He pointed at 3 framed plaques. He had been walking past them for years without saying their names out loud. Tonight he said them out loud. J.D., University of Michigan Law School. Naomi Coleman, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Vanessa Coleman, sworn in as United States Magistrate Judge. Adrian Coleman. In the middle of the 3 plaques was a 4th frame, smaller than the rest, older, faded handwriting on a yellowed piece of paper. Make me proud, Theodore. L. Margaret Hollister stood in front of that wall for a long time. She wiped her eyes with a careful, embarrassed motion. Theodore, you don't owe this city a thing. This city owes you everything. Theo looked at the wall, at the 4 frames, at 31 years of getting up at 4:42 in the morning, at the night on Highway 50 in 1998, at Loretta on her knees in the hospital parking lot, holding a baby against her skin. He smiled. Ma'am, I owe my wife. The rest is just interest. Adrian took his hand on one side. Naomi took his hand on the other side. Vanessa, the youngest, the one who had never known the woman in the photo, leaned her head against his shoulder. Theodore Coleman closed his eyes. For the first time in 12 years, he wasn't alone. For the first time in his life, he was finally being carried. Stories like this don't usually leave fingerprints on a city. This one did. For 2 weeks, every local station in Cincinnati led with the Coleman story. Then, the national networks picked it up. A morning show flew all 4 of them to New York: Theo, Adrian, Naomi, Vanessa. He sat between his daughters in a borrowed gray suit with his hands folded in his lap, looking like he wished the chair would swallow him. The host asked him what he wanted people to take away. He thought about it for a moment. Then he leaned forward into the microphone. Ma'am, I am not the story. The story is that I am not the only one out there. There are sanitation workers, janitors, home health aides. They stop their trucks for people every day. Nobody films it. Nobody talks about it. I just had a daughter with a badge. The audience laughed and clapped at the same time. Adrian wiped her eyes. 2 weeks later, the Margaret Hollister Dignity Fund cut its first check. $50,000 to a Cincinnati shelter that served retired sanitation and custodial workers. Men who had spent 40 years lifting other people's trash and ended up with nowhere to go. The second check funded the first scholarship class, 12 students, children of bus drivers, hospital orderlies, hotel housekeepers. Benny Walters' grandson sat in the front row at the announcement, in a button-down shirt his mother had ironed twice. Then the Coleman Protocol rolled out citywide. Training sessions for every sanitation crew in Hamilton County, a new radio code for vulnerable encounters, full route time pay protection for any worker who stopped to help. 3 months in, the data came in. 31 successful interventions. One case prevented a hypothermia death on the East End. Cyrus moved into a small apartment 3 blocks from Linden Street. The first thing he did was walk over to Theo's porch with a paper napkin in his hands. Inside the napkin was a piece of fresh toast. "We even now." Theo laughed. Then he cried. Then he laughed again. "Brother, we were never not even." Bradford Hollister's federal sentencing came down on a quiet Tuesday. The judge took her time. She read out the charges. She read out the evidence. She read out the impact statement from Margaret Hollister's conservator, who described an elderly woman with Alzheimer's who had been systematically robbed by the only family member she had left. Then the judge handed down the sentence. 84 months in federal prison. Full restitution to the Hollister Trust. No early release. He was let out in cuffs. The cameras outside the courthouse caught him walking with his head down, trying to cover his face with the cuff of his suit jacket. Margaret Hollister never saw the footage. She had been moved to a memory care residence with a beautiful courtyard and an attentive staff. Her conservatorship was now overseen by a court-appointed third party with quiet oversight from Adrian's bench. Theo visited her every other Wednesday afternoon. He brought her lemon cookies from a bakery down the street. He sat with her in the courtyard while the wind moved through the trees. She didn't always know who he was. He didn't mind. "I'm Theodore, ma'am," he would say, every time. "You have kind eyes," she would always answer. Back at the depot, life kept going. Benny Walters got promoted to lead operator. Earl Ramsey, the foreman who had once written Theo up for being 2.5 hours late, retired 3 months later. At his retirement party, Earl handed Theo a wrapped box. Inside was a brand new reflective sanitation jacket, heavier than the standard issue, monogrammed on the chest in white thread. T. Coleman. Earl cleared his throat twice before he could get the words out. "Yours got given away, Coleman. Figured it was time you got one back." That winter, on a quiet weeknight, the 4 Colemans had dinner at the small house on Linden Street. Adrian was washing dishes at the sink. Naomi was on her laptop on the couch, working a brief that was due in the morning. Vanessa was out on the porch with her phone pressed to her ear, talking to a federal prosecutor in another state. Theo sat in his armchair watching the evening news. A camera, if it had been there, would have lingered on the moment. 3 accomplished women and the man who had carried them through the rain when they had nothing. The richest man in Cincinnati for a long, long time had been driving truck 22. And nobody knew it, including him. 1 year later, the first snow of the season fell on Cincinnati. It was the same kind of snow that had come down on Madison Road that morning, soft, quiet, the kind that erases the world for a few hours. That afternoon, Theodore Coleman cut the ribbon on a brand new training facility in West Price Hill, the new home of the Coleman Protocol Program. He was wearing a suit again. He was uncomfortable again. A microphone was placed in front of him. He had written 8 sentences on an index card. He read them slowly. "I drove a truck for 31 years. I never wanted a microphone. I had a wife who told me to make her proud. I had 3 daughters who decided to make me proud. And I had a Tuesday morning where a woman in a blue cardigan was standing barefoot in the snow. If you take one thing from any of this, please stop the truck. Stop the car. Stop the meeting. Stop your day. There is somebody barefoot in the snow somewhere right now. And you might be the only person who sees them." The crowd stood up. He turned away from the microphone before they could finish clapping. That same morning, across town, a young woman in her early 20s was running a sanitation route in a different truck. Truck 11. New hire. 3 months on the job. She saw an old man standing in the middle of a frozen front lawn, house slippers, no coat, calling out a name nobody answered. She picked up her radio. Dispatch Truck 11, possible vulnerable encounter, activating Coleman protocol. The dispatcher's voice came back instantly, calm, trained, ready. A patrol car arrived in 8 minutes, EMS in 12. The man's daughter, reachable through the new emergency database the protocol had built, was on speakerphone before any of them got there. The old man was home, warm and safe in 22 minutes. Theo, being driven home from the ribbon cutting, saw truck 11 parked on the side of the road. Lights on, coffee in the dispatcher's hand, the old man's daughter wrapping him in a blanket. He didn't say anything to his driver. He just reached up and touched the small laminated card on his visor. "Make me proud, Theodore. L." That same evening, Adrian came to the house on Linden Street with an old envelope. Inside was a driver's license, worn, faded, the photo of a young blonde woman in her 20s. Theo had kept it in a shoebox under his bed for 28 years. He handed it to Vanessa, the youngest, the one who had never seen her birth mother's face. Vanessa held it for a long time. Then she walked over to the mantel and set the driver's license up next to a framed photograph of Loretta Coleman. "Both mothers," she said quietly. "Same place." Theo nodded from his armchair. "Both mothers, baby. Always in the same place." Outside, Theo set a paper napkin on the porch railing, a piece of fresh toast inside. A few minutes later, Cyrus walked past. He picked it up. He saluted. He walked on. Kindness is not a single moment. Kindness is a protocol. You write it once, and it runs forever, through every person who saw it work and every person who decided to do it next. Before you click away, let me tell you something. Theodore Coleman is the kind of man this country forgets on purpose. A black sanitation worker, quiet, limping, 2 months behind on the mortgage. The kind of man people walk past every single day and never see. But he saw a barefoot woman in the snow. He stopped his truck. He gave her his coat. And 28 years before that, he stopped his truck for 3 little girls in a flipped car in the rain. He never asked for credit. He never posted about it. He just did the work. Here is my question for you. Who is the Theodore Coleman in your life? The sanitation worker, the janitor, the home health aide, the bus driver? Somebody who stops their truck for people. Tell me about them in the comments. I read every single one. Hit like, share this with somebody who drives past too fast, and subscribe, because next week I have another story for you.